And welcome everybody. Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. And today we're doing catching up with Notion for your accounting practice. I called it catching up because I've done some things on Notion in the past. I've got a course on it, of course, and if you're a member of 97 and up, you've got access to that course. And at the end of this, I'll basically explain a promotion I've had going on now for about a month or so that I'll give you an opportunity to take advantage of, even if you missed it originally, where you can get access to that course and everything else 97 and up for free. So stick around to the end and I'll explain exactly how that works. But I called it catching up with Notion because it's kind of like Notion is constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. The way it looked when I did my first video, and it wasn't really that long ago, it was like 2 years ago maybe, is very different already from the way a lot of things look and work now. I mean, the substantial part of the interface is, of course, basically the same, but definitely some changes, improvements. Since the time I started using Notion, they've added a way to create recurring tasks. Right, in a database, you can create a recurring template, basically, is how that works. So there's been a lot of changes, and yet I know a lot of people, even people who have taken my course and seen the videos that I've done, are still kind of just figuring out, or haven't even had a chance yet to figure out, how to get into Notion and get started. And I was just on a call with a client this morning where we were discussing. It's a client that I have that's not QuickBooks related. I actually consult with them building Airtable stuff that gathers and compiles data that they use to do their payroll, which is significant. And I have now gotten their CEO to drink the Notion Kool-Aid. And I was on a call with her accounting person this morning going over our monthly review because it's the beginning of the month so that we can, update things based on last month's activity. And she was explaining to me how this CEO has drunk the Kool-Aid for Notion, and I took credit. I said, that's totally my fault. And but what we got to talking about, because she's been playing with it too, is that here's the thing with Notion. When you start getting into it and understanding how to use the tools, and I'm going to talk about the toolbox that is Notion. You start to realize that the beauty of it, the benefit of it, is in its ability for you to bend it to your will. You can quite literally get it to do whatever you want it to do. The downside of that same concept is that you're starting truly with a blank page. And so most people don't know where to start when they first open up Notion and they're trying to figure out how to get started. So it's not like ClickUp, where out of the box, ClickUp is a project management tool. You're going to have your folders and lists and tasks and subtasks and so on. Notion is quite literally just a blank page. You have to create the world that you want to live in. But again, that's the benefit of it, is that you get to create the world that you want to live in, where Notion is concerned. So that is what today's show is all about, if you will. I'm going to share my screen so that Greg doesn't scold me for forgetting to do so. Right, so everybody can see my gorgeous Notion slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about the toolbox, because really the way I look at Notion, the way I've come to look at Notion, is that it is like a toolbox that's filled with lots of compartments, each of which has a different set of tools in it. And so it's as I've got on screen. The key to me with any of these kinds of knowledge management tools, which in the biggest picture, that's what Notion really is. It's a knowledge management tool, which can be bent to one's will of using it as a work management tool. Notice I didn't say project management. It's a work management tool, because project management suggests that everything we do is a project, and that's not the case for almost all of us. For almost all of us, we have lots of things to do that aren't part of a project. So I've come to really love the word work management, or the phrase work management, as opposed to project management. But the idea is, as I've got right here, is to be able to capture, clarify, and organize any kind of information you need access from. And in this case, you can use it from everything from your personal to-dos to every detailed task and project that you need to complete for your clients, right? That's in essence what Notion is going to allow you to do if you choose to, right? And so in part one, we're going to talk about the toolbox, right? And this is something I often, say when it comes to presenting on how to use these kinds of tools. And that is that, because a lot of people say, oh, it's another app. I can't use all these apps. How am I supposed to figure out how to use all these apps? And like I often say, it's the right tool for the right job, right? And here's the thing, if I just gave you a Phillips head screwdriver to do a construction project with, you're kind of screwed, right? There's going to be things that come up that aren't Phillips head, that still need to be screwed or hammered in or something. So you're going to need more than just a Phillips head screwdriver when you're using a tool. And the same thing is true when it comes to managing your information and doing the client work to create the work product that you need to create for your clients when you're working on their accounting and bookkeeping information. So the Phillips head alone won't be very useful, but if I give you a toolbox filled with a ton of different tools, and then of course at the same time the resources for how to learn how to use them, then that would be infinitely more useful, wouldn't it? And so that's where I come in. Notion plus me equals the toolbox that teaches you how to use the toolbox and where the tools are, and how to kind of put things into context, like knowing when to use the right tool. And some of that is going to come down to you really just playing with it. And I'm going to go over a bit of that today. I'm going to show you quite literally from a blank page how to get started and how to access the first kind of set of tools that you'll want to learn. First of all, where and how to access it, but then how to go through it and get familiar with the different things that you can use and do on a blank page in Notion, right? So this is going to be your first step if you want to creating a one-stop shop. A lot of people asked me when I first started getting hot on Notion, Seth, is it going to replace ClickUp? And at the time I said, no, it's not. It's going to replace some processes. But little by little, as I moved different processes over to Notion, I kind of fell more and more in love with Notion and its ability, for me to be able to bend it to my will, that eventually I did completely move out of ClickUp. And now I use Notion exclusively. At the same time, I don't necessarily suggest that everybody should do that, right? Because as I mentioned, there's a lot that you have to kind of, learn how to do in Notion. And it's not that I would say it's a huge learning curve, but you still need to take the time, to learn what it can do and how to do what it can do. Now, I'm the kind of person that loves diving into something like this and doing that. You may not be. You may be like, I don't have time for this. And so, it's the right tool for the right job. And at the same time, and I think I've got this in a slide later on, like I often like to say, what keeps me sober might get you drunk. Right? So bear that in mind too. What's good for me is not always good for you. But my goal here today is to show you and give you, in a sense, access to how to access the tools in the different compartments in the toolbox that I like to refer to Notion as being, right? So this is your first step. How to get started. We're starting with a blank page, like I said. So at first glance, that's all you're going to see. And that's where, like I said, a lot of people get stuck. I got stuck myself on it. And then I went on the web and started Googling videos on YouTube to see what, what information was available for somebody like me who hadn't used Notion. And I was hard pressed to find anything really useful. Most of what I found were videos from kids who, have grown up with a mobile device in their hands, and, and their videos were not really on how to get started and they didn't go from a blank page. Their videos were more like show and tell, like, here's how I'm using Notion, and everything was already built out, and they just kind of gave you a tour. And I was like, this is cool. I just wish I had a few tips at least on how to get from a blank page to that. So I ended up creating that video as I learned more and more, because of course, once I get determined to do something, nothing's going to stop me, right? Now, the thing to remember about this is it's not accounting software, right? So most of us are so in tune to working with accounting software like QuickBooks Online, where our biggest fear is that we can't or don't or shouldn't change things around much once we've got things established. Notion is the opposite of that. I've completely revamped my whole layout in terms of how I do things in Notion many, many times already in the past 2 years, because the more I learn how to use it, the more I get better ideas of how I want things organized. And the more I realized how beautifully Notion allows you to, again, if you'll let yourself think of it like this, to do things in what I call geometric versus linear. Most apps are linear, and on the surface, if you start using Notion, I'm not going to say in the wrong way, but in the way that's probably presents itself most obviously to you, and because of the way our brains are trained with all the apps that we've typically used over the years, we tend to do things linear. We tend to do things in folders and subfolders. Here it's pages and subpages, and you can do that with Notion, but throughout the rest of the hour, I'm going to guide you hopefully away from thinking that way and doing that. And you'll see why, because our brains don't work like that. Our brains work in 2 dimensions. They work in time and space. And I'm going to show you how you can use Notion to accomplish laying out and organizing your information based on that 2-dimensional look at things, which is what I'm referring to. Really, it's really more than 2-dimensional when I talk about, geometric linking and things like that. So the first thing is, again, how to get started with Notion. I'm going to give you what I didn't have, and I'm going to do better than just a screenshot here. What I'm actually going to do is flip over to Notion and show you. So on my page here, I've got the beginnings of a template that I'm working on, which is going to be included in a program I'm going to be rolling out towards the end of this year. And think of this as a Notion template filled chock full of Notion templates. It's going to have all kinds of stuff in this. So what you're going to see here in this today, A, is not available yet, but B, it's hardly complete. I mean, you'll see it's got a lot in it, but I plan to have a whole lot more between now and when what you're looking at officially releases, right? So how to get started with Notion, you're going to get started with a blank page, and I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like in just a minute. I'm going to add a blank page right to this template here so that we can, play around a little bit. But this is your main toolbox. So let's do that. I'm going to go here under where it says daily, and I'm going to just create a new blank page, and I'm going to just call it scrap. So actually, I'm going to say / okay? And before I do this is the first compartment in the toolbox. As soon as you hit the /, don't touch anything else. Note the list of things that it brings up. These are all the things I could potentially right here and now add to this page. Okay, so I could just do text, and I don't really need this command for that. I could just start typing if I just want text, right? This is what I'm going to choose in a minute because I can add a page. I can add a to-do list. I can add specifically formatted text as in heading 1, 2, and 3. I can add a simple table, bulleted list. You get the idea. And so your first assignment is going to be to go through this very menu, hit the / and scroll everything. If you have the paid version of Notion, then you'll have the AI tools, which are actually really good. And then here's where you can add different kinds of media. They've broken it down into sections. There are database elements you can add. It's, you would be adding the same database and creating, perhaps multiple views to just have different ways of looking at the information. And then down here, we've got some AI blocks. Okay. And then we have advanced blocks like a table of contents, buttons, there's all kinds of stuff you can add to Notion. And the key, and I spent probably a good few hours, one of my first times sitting with Notion, scrolling through this and actually choosing them to see what can I do? What are the possibilities, right? What is it possible for me to do? Oh, look, there's a Google Drive integration here. I definitely want to explore that and know what that's all about. I can embed stuff, right? I can embed a tweet if I wanted to do that for some reason, right? Google Maps, I can embed a map, right? That can be useful. So that's the idea here is, your first assignment is to go through, this is like the main compartment in your toolbox, which has most of your tools. And there's other tools in other areas that we'll get into, and I'll show you, kind of what I mean. Down here, we're into an area where it's got specific app integrations like Miro, something called Sketch, Excalidraw. I don't know what half this stuff is, right? Loom, right? If you have a Loom recording to embed, you can do that very easily here and so on. So again, explore this, take the time. And one of the tips there, in case it's not obvious, is that you should go into your calendar if you really want to dive into Notion and learn how to use a lot of this stuff. And just schedule the time on your calendar. Schedule a 2 to 3 or 4 hour block on a Friday, whenever you feel like you're going to be most relaxed, and call it like Notion exploration time or something, right? Put that on your calendar, non-negotiable. Nobody else gets in that time, and plan on spending the time to play. That's the only way you're really going to learn. And the thing is, it's beyond learning. You'll get inspiration for all kinds of things you can do. That's how I ended up ultimately moving over from ClickUp entirely to Notion, even though that was not my original intent. Right? I planned on using both. So that's the first assignment for you, is to get onto a blank page and, start with that / command and explore. Just explore. What can I do? How can I work with this stuff? Now I'm going to choose the page option. So / page lets me embed a subpage inside the current one. And you can do that. You can do that all day long. But like I said, I'm going to guide you away from thinking about pages and subpages as being in that, linear fashion. In fact, while I'm here and I've created it, I have purposely hidden the sidebar. But if I expand the sidebar here and I go into, let me hide some of this other stuff that we are not using. Here's Bulletproof Notion. On the left, if I expand this, you can see this is stuff from the top level page, which you haven't seen. But here's the template page that I started off with. And if I expand that, it's got all the other subpages, including the one that I'm about to title, right? I'm going to just call this bullet proof Notion scrap. Okay, and it's just like that sounds. It's going to be digital scrap paper, right? So maybe I'll just use a little paper icon. Now, some of you are maybe seeing this for the first time and maybe wondering, oh, okay, so you can add an icon to a page. Is that really important? Is it necessary? And my answer to you is going to be absolutely 100% critically important, because the more you play with Notion, the more you'll see, especially when we're talking about the geometric linking aspect of it. From anywhere in Notion, I can link to anything else in Notion. But the one thing that's going to help me when I'm accessing pages through that drop-down list of, where Notion's trying to confirm what I want to link to, that icon is going to give me the visual that I need in almost all those cases, so I know for sure this is the thing I want. Because over time, as you accumulate a lot of data in Notion, it's going to start to get a little confusing at certain points if you haven't been careful about this kind of stuff. As far as, like that's why I call this bulletproof Notion scrap, because I have an actual page that's just called scrap that I use every single day. And so I don't later want to get myself confused between that one and this version of it. This is obviously just for me to demonstrate for you. And for now, my main objective here was really to, get you into a blank page so that you can see where to start, right? So icon, critically important. You can also add a cover. That's less necessary, in my opinion, than the icon, but it's a good thing to do. It creates a visual, an environment that I find pleasant to work in, right? So for the sake of time, I'm just going to pick a solid color here, but you can play around. You can change it and use Unsplash to get stock-free photos, and a lot of what I do, like throughout this actual template that I'm going to make available at the end of the year, I kind of just use the coffee shop theme. Why? Because I dig coffee shops, right? So I even mentioned that somewhere, I think in the course that I've started to, write the content about that, I've chosen to go with kind of a coffee shop theme because that makes me feel warm and fuzzy, right? You might like something else. So the cover image isn't as critically important from a practical standpoint as the icon is, for the reason I explained, but it's certainly a nice thing to do. And it also helps you kind of get the quick visual in terms of knowing what planet you're on, so to speak. Now, notice as we're looking at this, and it's still a blank page, the only thing I've done is give it a title. So now it kind of wants to know what I might want to do. Do I want to create an empty page? The AI picks up on the title and asks me essentially if I want to have it write about bulletproof Notion scrap with the AI. Down here, I can do a bunch of other things, where I can access templates. I can go straight to creating a table, which is a database element, board, timeline, calendar, and so on. I'll get deeper into some of this stuff a little later. For now, I just want you to understand what you're looking at. And for now, we're going to start with a blank page, which I could click empty page, or if I simply hit the enter key, that's what it assumes I want. Okay. So now I have literally a blank page that I can do whatever I want to do with, right? And so going back to my slides here, let's talk about that. So I showed you already the scroll bar that, when you first hit that /, there's obviously a lot more than meets the eye here. So and I just want to recap and reiterate that this is your main toolbox right here with the / command and everything that you have access to as far as what you can put on a blank page that you've just started with. And like I said earlier, while you play, I really want you to think of the possibilities in terms of each of the things that you might run across that sparks your interest. Some of it you'll say, okay, I have no need for this, but a lot of the things you're going to look at and say, oh, I could see doing something really cool with that, right? So I just want you to think. That's why I want you to set aside time for like exploration, right? This is the kind of tool where you need that kind of time with it to explore and just lead yourself with curiosity. You have to have an incredible amount of curiosity. Okay, so I've shown you this. We created a new page. We called it scrap, right? I showed you about adding the icon, and you could type in the search. I just happen to have it in my recent icon, so I chose the paper. And like I said, spend time to, learn and play with these tools and figure out what they can do, and then get inspiration for what you can do with them, right? So now that brings us to part 3, actually, which is the secret to making Notion work for you. So I'm going to go back to our scrap page, and I'm going to change this, right? So let's say this was not a sub page. Just ignore the fact that this is a sub page. And let's say I'm creating my home page. And that's kind of after, like I said earlier, many iterations of how I like to organize things in Notion. This is what I've landed on, is you want to have like a home page, kind of like your high level menu for everything. that you might want to do, right? And so the home page, again, highest level, and assuming you wanted to incorporate all areas of your life, then we have to think at that very, very high level as we begin, right? So what does that mean? Well, I learned from reading a book years ago called The 1 Minute Millionaire to break things down like this. And the book is designed to teach us how millionaires think from 1 minute to the next. And this is how they explain that millionaires kind of break down their whole lives. They compartmentalize their lives as follows. And it's in this order for a reason, right? But as you can see, we've got body, mind, spirit, time, people, and money. And you can see the definitions that pretty clearly break down what each one means. And, you know, their approach to this, the idea they have behind it is you want to be of sound body and mind before you work on the realm of your spiritual side, right? And that can go a number of different ways. If you're religious, great. If not, then you can do more, you know, things like meditation for the spiritual part, but it's things you do to treat your spirit, whatever that looks like. Okay. So we want to think high level like this when we're thinking at the top level of Notion, when we're creating that homepage. Again, keeping in mind, don't worry, you're not making a serious commitment. You can easily revamp this at any time, and Notion makes this very easy to do. In fact, when I've done this, I've taken whatever version of a homepage I may have had, and I didn't change this page. What I've done each time is I've created a whole new page, just named it something different, or version 2 or whatever, and little by little started moving things over based on what I wanted to keep, and then reorganizing things based on what I felt like I now know better, right? So when we break this down, we want to break it down in terms of maybe the highest level things in our lives. So for starters, don't worry about any of the features. Let's just say I'm going to have my personal stuff, right? My personal life. Then I'll have a section here I'll call work, right? And then what else did I suggest here? Maybe we just start with these two, personal and work, okay? Now, initially here, I type text, right? Just so I can start thinking, right? Writing is thinking, and that's what we're doing here. We're on a blank page. We're doing some writing, which means I'm thinking about how do I want to do this? How do I want to lay this out? So I've just got text, but reality is I want these to become pages, right? I want a personal page for everything that I'm going to put under the heading of personal, and a work page for everything that's going to be related to my business and how I want to run things there. So Notion is very forgiving. And every time I type something on a page, it is what is called a block. So if you notice, as I hover my mouse over, there's that little thing with the dots I like to call a cheese grater. I don't know what the official name is, right? But I can click and drag from the cheese grater, and you see those blue lines? That lets me know where it's going to land when I let go of my mouse button, right? But let's say I want it to be on the left. Let's say I want work to be in like a column on the left of personal. So let's click and drag it again, and you see how the blue bar shows up vertically, right? That lets me know it's going to put it into columns. So that's the first thing. It took me a while to learn because I couldn't find a video that shows you that, but eventually I found it and kind of figured it out. That's how you create columns, because I would see column layouts on people's Notion pages, but I had no idea how they accomplished it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this personal text block and I'm going to turn into a page. Done. And I'm going to do the same thing with work, turn into a page. Now you'll notice that these have these generic icons because no icon has been set. So it'll show you this generic icon. Some people in Slack have recently asked, why does it do that and how do you fix that? Well, you fix that by changing the icon, and I can do it right from here, right? So maybe I'll put like a little, well, for me, it would be more likely a cat than a dog, right? Because I'm a dog person for sure. And for work, there's this cool little briefcase icon that I like. Brief, there it is. Okay, so now I've got the icons. And by the way, if I move my mouse carefully between these two, it will show me that bar that lets me, I can actually resize these columns if I want to, right? So just in case you're wondering, you can do this very, very easily. Now let's dig into the work side, okay? And by the way, you'll notice every time I get into a new page, I click the ellipsis. This is just my preference. I change the font to that. You only have 3 choices, the default, serif, or mono. And I always like to do full width. Every time I find myself in a page that's not full width, I get like a digital version of claustrophobia for some reason. Like it makes me a little crazy. So I always change those settings. I've explored, there's apparently no way to change those settings by default. I wish there was. I've been meaning to reach out to support and ask them about this, but haven't had a chance to yet. Not that important. As you saw, it takes 2 clicks to do it every time. So now I want to look at how we want to break down the work part of this. Now, some of you know I've been studying this book for a while now called Come Up for Air. So a lot of what I'm going to show you for the rest of the hour is going to be based on stuff I'm learning from studying this book, right? And I'll have the links up, when I put up the replay if you want to, but obviously you can search for Come Up for Air and you'll find it pretty quickly. So we're going to take a page from his book and we're going to divide the business into 3 major areas with certain subgroupings, right? And I'm going to show you the layout and then we'll kind of go into Notion and start doing it. But for today's purpose, it's more important that you get the layout here. And here's what he does. He calls it a CPR framework, which stands for Communications, Planning, and Resources. And under Communications, you have and by the way, this is kind of the beginning of your company wiki, where you're starting to define these areas and what tools you use and everything else about how you run your business within this framework. So under communications, we have internal communications, and that could be your Slack, your Discord, or Teams, and you might want to list whatever phone system, like I have Dialpad that I use for our phone system. External communications, generally speaking, going to be email, and then whatever you do with your real mail, like Earth Class Mail or UPS Store, or whatever you do. It's useful to document what you're using for each of these things, to think about it. And as time goes on and you're building this resource, the beautiful thing about having a really well-organized company wiki is that when you hire new people, you can point them to the wiki, and that saves collective time, because instead of their time and another employee's time being used up answering their question about where to go to find something, they can just go to the wiki. So now you're not using 2 people's time, you're only using the one person's time, and hopefully they only need to do that once, because once you show them where the wiki is, they know where to go to access almost anything they need to know. And this is a point that Nick Sonnenberg, the author of Come Up for Air, makes a strong point about. He talks about the whole premise of this is really based on group level productivity, which there are a lot of differences between that versus individual productivity, where you don't have to worry about a team and working with other people. So there's a lot of, he's done a lot of sort of math on how quickly wasted time can add up when 2 or more people are working on the same thing that they shouldn't need to be, right? And so that's one of the points. So we've got the communications piece. And I just realized I haven't been looking over at the chat, but it doesn't look like we have any questions. Mariette's in there commenting. Hi, Mariette. So communications, internal, external, planning, work management. This is where I got that phrase from, right? I can't take the credit. I learned it from Nick. And then we have the resources, which again is the company wiki, which we're kind of in the process of creating here. And then we have process management. So this would be apps that you might use like Suite Process, or there's a bunch of them out there that you would use, to actually outline your SOPs, right? That's your process management tool. For me, it's going to be Notion, that I can use for this. Nick actually does not suggest using Notion for process management. He suggests using a separate tool like Suite Process for that. I think there's another one called Suite P, and then there's Process Street, I think a lot of you are familiar with. So that is what this looks like, right? Now, let's go over to, I want to show you something else in my Notion. That kind of illustrates what this looks like. Back up to my main template page here. So this is kind of like the home title page, and then here's the template. So you can see in the template the way I've started to get this laid out. So under work, I've got your 3 major areas: the communication, the planning, and the resources, right? And then notice over here, I've got education off to the right. There's a reason for that, which is as follows, that educational resources may overlap, right? There may be some educational resources I'm tapping into for personal reasons. If I want to learn about like how to grow a garden in my backyard, that's got nothing to do with work, but I may want to spend time, learning how to do that if I want to learn how to beautify my own yard as opposed to paying somebody else to do it, right? So the point is that's why in this page I just showed you, and we'll go back to it, I have education sort of off to the side here, because this might include things that are both work related and personal related, right? And there's any number of ways I can go. This thing here that says education is what's called a call out. So, and how did I learn this? By doing exactly what I've already told you to do. Hit the / as I scrolled this list, I saw call out. That's interesting. What the heck is that? And I chose it. Now I can just type it because I know it's there. And what that does is it creates this sort of shaded background. You can change the color where you can include an icon. And it's just a nice way, as you can see, of organizing a page and creating different sections. So under this education call out, as you can see, I've got books, meaning like reading, right? As opposed to books I might be writing, let's say. So I always put a lot of intention into how I like name these things and do these things. So there is a reason why I put reading in there. And it's also because one of the next phases of my own development is going to be that I'm going to finally, after all these years, start writing books, something I should have been doing for a long time already. So I might have books. I might have separate resources here for the work-related education resources versus personal, or I could create a database, which I'll show you at a glance how to do in a little while. And in that database, I might have a descriptor by way of a tag where I describe personal versus work. So this way I just have all the resources in one database, which makes it easier to access because it's all in one place. And as you'll see later, I can create different views in that database to divide up, one filtered for the work-related, one filtered for the personal. So that's purely preference, right? Like I said, what gets me drunk might keep you sober and vice versa. So some of you might say, oh, that would be a mess for me to have everything in one place. I would want them separate, while others would say, oh, I'd hate to have to go to two different places to access all that. I want it in one place, and I love having the descriptor that helps me distinguish and filter. Right. So that's why I've gotten really careful over the years about not trying to tell people this is the way you need to do it. Right. You got to figure out which way works best for you. So what's next on my to-do list here? So this gets into what I was talking about when I talked about geometric linking versus linear, and why I want you to try and avoid the temptation of looking to that sidebar. Because if you look too much at that sidebar, you're going to be tempted to buy into the idea of using this in a very linear way instead of the way I think it becomes much more powerful, right? And so you could see from this diagram, linear, it's just that. It's everything's in a line. And then, like I said, it's folders and subfolders or pages and subpages. And then after a while, when you accumulate a lot of data in a tool like this, it's going to be next to impossible to find stuff. That's where a lot of tools have failed me in the past. So I wanted to get you in the habit right away of not thinking of it in a linear fashion, but rather getting used to the idea that I can link to anything from anything, right? And I'll show you what that looks like really quickly. So let's go back to here. And what I'm going to do now is, where'd that scrap page go that I created? Oh, I changed it to home. I was looking for scrap. I'm going to Control click this link. You'll notice, by the way, I'm using the desktop app. I don't actually normally use the desktop app. I actually prefer the web, but for today's purposes, I wanted to use this because it makes it easier for me to identify quickly which window on my screen is the one I'm sharing with you, right? But some of you might love the desktop app. Now, one thing that didn't take quite as I'd hoped is when you Control click, it should open this up in a new tab. So let me get a good feel on that. So as soon as I did that, because I now just went to a second tab, the tab section of the app was revealed here. So now you can see I've kept my place here on this tab, so I can get back to this easily. And at the same time, I can work in here now, right? So let's say from back in here, so notice I have the bulletproof journal here. So I'm in the home page, which is another sub page. Let's say over here, without going into work or personal, because in my journaling, I'm going to write about both. So let's say over here, I want to just quick link to the bulletproof journal so that if this becomes my homepage, that at a high level is where I go to access everything. And let's say it's the first thing I want to do every day is write in my journal. Then I want to create that link right from here. In other words, I am creating the experience, like I've said a few times already, wherein I'm putting everything I need and want access to at my own fingertips. This is where it goes from, being a blank page where you don't know where to start to starting to kind of get the idea. It starts to click now as follows. So all I have to do is type @ and bullet and see how it's starting to come up with suggestions, right? But because I've got a lot of stuff in here, more stuff comes up. So the more I type, of course, the more relevant the suggestions. So if I type bulletproof journal, there it is. Notice how the icon makes it really easy to identify. That's what I was talking about earlier. This is exactly the point at which that icon becomes important and useful, right? And it looks like I've got another version of this here somewhere else that I'll have to clean up. By the way, Control click works from here too. Although this time I was creating it. So now I can hit Control click and that bulletproof journal will open up in still another tab. Now, by the way, one of the reasons I don't love the desktop app as much as the browser is in the browser, I can click and drag to reorder these tabs. In the desktop, I can't do that. I'm sort of stuck with the order that I happen to open them up in, which annoys me to no end and drives me crazy. So that's like one of the many reasons I actually prefer to work in the browser on this. So just going back to my point about linear versus geometric, if you think of Notion as a digital notebook, then you're selling yourself very short, because you think of a notebook, that's very linear. I've got maybe sections and then pages within each section, and that's the best I can do. But Notion is like having a notebook with sections and pages where I can at any point take a page out of that section and I can put it anywhere else that I want and link back to where it came from. So it's linked. I can even sync blocks of text so that if I change it in one place, it changes in the other. So it's so much more powerful and so much more geometric in nature in terms of what you can do and how you can work with the information that you're storing. I can link to anything from anywhere and vice versa. And you'll start to see as you link between different pages that Notion has an automatic backlink feature. So if I link from one page to another, you'll notice a backlink. So where did I just do that? In the Bulletproof Journal. It's not going to show that here because this is a special kind of page where the whole entire page is dedicated to a database. So even though I've linked to it here, it's not going to show up. But let me give another example. So let's go back here and let's say I want to link to my Bulletproof CRM, which hopefully is not a full-fledged database like that one. Yep, that one is. And there's reasons for that I'll explain later. There's two ways to do a database. One is where the whole page is nothing but the database. So you're not allowed to have any other sort of context on that page, but it has its use cases, why it's important. The other way is to create what's called an inline database, where it's just one element on a page where you can have anything else, right? So let's try websites and bookmarks here. And I don't believe this is, okay, this is not a full-fledged database page. It's not dedicated. So let's go at websites. And it's pretty smart, like also when it's bringing up the results, it's pretty good about finding what's most likely what you're looking for, relevant things I was looking at recently. So now that I've created this link to that page, here, it shows you a backlink, right? And so I can quickly get back and forth from these. And there are use cases for this where over time I accumulate a lot of links. It gives me a lot of context, especially in terms of that timeline I mentioned. So if I'm writing in my journal every day, and every day that I'm writing in my journal, anytime I'm writing something and where I'm referencing something else that's in Notion, I might be referencing a particular client who's in my CRM. I link to that client's page. And over time, I can see, oh, I wrote about this client on June 3rd, June 5th, 2023, and so on. It just provides a lot of useful context over time. And it really helps me in terms of organizing my thought process and my thinking, right? So this is something where it's, again, the geometric nature of how you can link things in Notion gets really, really useful when you start to change the way you're thinking about things and start to see it sort of differently this way. All right, what have we got in the chat? So Donna's saying, even if you're a solopreneur, yes, definitely use Notion as a work management tool. The point I was making earlier was really more that there are certain things that won't apply when it's just you that become very different when you have two or more people who have to collaborate and share information. That was kind of the key point. But absolutely, even as a solopreneur, you want something like this just to manage everything. There's just so much stuff to manage, from the apps that we're using with a particular client to everything else that we need to do, right? So one thing I do in Notion when I set up a page for a client is, if there are particular apps I'm using because of the nature of the services I'm providing that client, I can create bookmarks on that client's page. So I don't have to worry about a linear browser bookmarking system, but rather it's contextual in that client's page. Right at my fingertips, I can Ctrl Click a bunch of bookmarks, and in 30 seconds or less, I can have all the apps open that I might need to work in while I'm working on that client's stuff, right? So there's one quick kind of example about this. So again, the secret to this is to visualize how you want your world to look and then get to work and create that, remembering again that you can change it. So don't worry about, oh my God, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole and it's going to be a mess to clean up. It's not. The more you start getting used to how Notion works and how easy it is to move things around on a page and to create new pages and set up new things, the more you'll realize how sort of non-committal it is in a good way, right? So now let's talk about part 4. This is the part most of you probably really wanted to come here for, which is how to set up Notion for your accounting practice specifically. And this is where we're going to talk a lot more about databases, which I've now mentioned a couple of times, right? So the database is like another compartment in your toolbox, right? Remember, the first main compartment was what's in that whole / menu. As soon as you add a database element to a page, you've got a whole new set of tools in a different compartment that you have access to, plus all the original ones, right? So that's kind of what I want to get into and show you. And I'm going to demonstrate by showing you the databases that I've already created here in this template, so you can start to get, a sense about, how this works and how it's laid out. So let's take a look. First of all, let me give you the overview of what this looks like, right? So we're going to set up the following databases that I've already set up. You're going to set up a database for your firm. And this is what really lives at the top level of your work management. And it's essentially your client list. And this is one database. Now, originally, I didn't do it this way. This is one of the major things I've changed as I learned how to use Notion better and better. I used to have one master database that just had all the clients and all their work in the same database. And I would just filter it out based on having a tag for the client. But problems came up with that on a few levels, so that ultimately I learned it was better to do it this way. So I did. So we have one database, which is for your firm, and that is going to include, it's like I said, it's essentially your client list. Then you have each client, okay? And by the way, your firm, in terms of managing your own firm's internal work, that's just going to be treated like another client in the client list, right? I found that to be most effective, right? So I'm giving you the examples here, but let's look at, kind of the real deal as far as what it looks like in the template. So down over here, and let's just close some of these open tabs. So we're going to go into planning work management. This is where that lives, okay? And over here, I've got, like I said, this is the client list. So this is a database. It's a table view on a database. I click this, I can rename it. I can edit the view. There's different properties, right? We don't have enough time to get this deep with it today. I want you to see the layout so you can get into Notion on your own and start thinking about how to add a table, right? You're going to hit /table to add a table. Just be careful when you do that, that you're not adding in the simple table, which when I do it, you'll see is the first option here. What you want is the database table view when you're creating something like this. So with that, you can get started building this. And over here, I've got an example of one client, Acme Inc., right? And these are just columns that I built, okay? So for the next due date, notice it's due D-O, not D-U-E. That's something a lot of us are lacking in our project management systems, is the distinction between when's the next time I need to do something versus when is this due, right? So I really like that, and I like having the distinction between the two. So over here, I'm going to say the next time I want to work on this is Friday, okay? And then here, this is the Acme Inc. client, so I might have a link to their website. Right over here, I've got a list of tags to choose from where I can choose what sort of services I'm providing them. So this is a multi-select because I might be doing bookkeeping and CFO and advisory and so on. If any of you have ever used like Airtable or any other tools, this is very similar, right? Here I've got one that I set up to describe the industry, like maybe these guys are e-commerce, right? And if I scroll to the right, you can see all of the rest. Entity type, right? Let's say they're an S Corp. Data formation. This is all the information I like to gather from the client when they sign on with me. Now, this is one way of looking at it. And as you can see, it starts to get pretty wide in terms of the scroll. So let's actually open up this page, right? This first column here is the page itself. And when I open up the page, I'm basically opening up the whole Acme Inc. world. And I Control clicked this little double arrow just now so I could view it in its own tab without losing my place here, right? So now over here, it shows me the first few fields, and then I can click here where it says 14 more properties. So the properties are the same thing as those columns we were just looking at. And over here is where I can, view it a little more succinctly. So if I wanted to, I could start filling this out and filling in all the information. Obviously, normally when they onboard, they would fill out a form. That information would be captured. And I haven't done this yet with Notion, but it's easy enough to do. There's an app that will let you create a form that will drop into these fields, and you just have to map it. Or you could do it with Zapier if you like Jot forms or something, which is actually what I prefer. So when I open up this client, now I have another database, okay? So I have a separate database, which I've renamed called Acme Inc. Work Management. And I've just got a few examples of things you might get started with, right? Like here's a support ticket, right, that I might have opened on the client's behalf if they were using Notion, let's say, right? And so each of these is another page, but what I want you to realize is that each of these pages that you open is like a whole new world unto itself that can have all of the elements of anything that's available to you in Notion. Here you're seeing a database within a database. Some people who took my course when I first rolled it out were like very overwhelmed and confused by that. But so just take your time, slow down, think about this. It can be a little confusing, but it's none of you are. There's not a single person in this group, I'm sure, who are here with us right now who are absolutely way beyond smart enough to get this. You just have to slow down and think about what we're doing here, right? I've got a client list, and then within each client on that client list is that client's whole world, and that's what we're looking at here. Okay. I've even got kind of the beginnings, or what could be the beginnings of my version of what Liscio does, where I've got a page for Acme Inc. for document management, and where I would put any documents I want to keep stored here. Or like I've done here, I create a URL type field, right? There's a type of field you can create in a database called a URL, and I've called it the Google Drive link. So if I'm keeping all their stuff in Google Drive, then I just link to the Google document here. Why do I need to do this? It's redundant because here, again, I'm putting it at my fingertips. So the idea is everything branches out from Notion. Notion is like the sun in my solar system, right? And so everything links out from there. And so again, this is at my fingertips. So when I'm working on this client, if I know I need to access documents that they've sent me or that I've gathered somehow, I've got them all right here. If you're using Liscio, then heck, just create a bookmark, right? And this is where I put the bookmarks, by the way, for a client like this. Let me just quickly go to a web page here, and I'll quickly go to Liscio's website. It's liscio.me, because I want to illustrate an example of what I was talking about. And if I take a URL and copy it from my browser, and then just Control V, paste it into Notion, it gives me choices. If I choose create bookmark, it fetches it, and boom, there it is. There's my bookmark. If I don't want it filling up a whole page, because I might have several other apps that I want to include, I can even take a blank block of text and drag it like I showed you earlier to just create a column, right? So the next thing I might want to include here would be like the QBO login, right? QBO.intuit.com. Stupid browser turned it into a Google search. So back down here. And boom. So now I've got my QBO sign in there, right? And if I decide I prefer to have this on the left, then I just drag it. Right? Now, this is one way of doing it. Another way might be to create a page in the actual database called bookmarks. And then you would create a table for bookmarks like websites and links for that particular client. There's any way you can do this. Like I said earlier, what keeps me sober might get you drunk. And then here's an example of the different views. So here would be to do, and this is a calendar view. And it shows me that I've got something that's marked to be done today, right? Meeting notes. How is this organized? Well, it's not. There's just a filter where the date, I'll show you the properties. If I go here and I go to properties, it's based on the due date. And there's properties, and then there's layout. Layout is where I choose whether it's a calendar, table, or whatever. Okay, and over here, it's showing the calendar by next due date. So if I have multiple date columns, this is where I choose and let it know what date I want to see things by in this particular calendar, right? So it has to have a due date in order to appear here, which makes me wonder, okay, here I had next due date is June 5th. The actual due date here is June 9th, right? So let's go back and let's confirm. What did I do there? Layout. It's based on the next due DO date, which is set for today. So let's say I look at this and I think, now, you know what? I'm going to work on this on Friday. I can just click and drag, and boom, this is a meeting notes page that I created. And boom, everything is from that meeting is in here. And here's a template I've created, which I'm going to show you next how to do that. That gives me the layout for a meeting, right? So I've got one person's agenda, another person's agenda, their items, and then follow-up items set up as to-do items, right? So as we have the meeting and we identify who's going to do what, we've got the space created for it. The other thing that's really cool about this that I do a lot, because I do my meetings, of course, via Zoom, like most of you probably do, and I automatically record those meetings to my desktop, I can drag and drop the video from that Zoom call right here onto this page. So over here, I might do something like /call out, right? Video, Zoom, right? Let's change the icon to something like a movie projector. And then I'll drag and drop the Zoom video recording right here, and it renders beautifully with a player. And then, of course, all I need to do is share this page with the client. I've already got it. It's set. Anything in this database is set to be automatically shared to the web. I grab this web link, send it to the client, and say, here's a link to my notes from today's meeting. You'll see the recordings up there as well. And clients love this stuff. It makes it so easy to, share this kind of stuff. So let's back up a second because we're running short on time already. I can see that. And I want to show you a couple of key things here. So I've got this one client, Acme Inc., getting back up to the top level. So what happens when I want to create a new client? Let's delete this extra row. And if I click new, or let's click the dropdown first. In the dropdown, it shows me any templates that I've created. These templates are unique to this database. So this is why it's nice to have a separate database with a list of all my clients. It's one of the reasons, as opposed to having this database and all the clients' work mixed into one. So if I click new here, I can choose new client template right from here. As soon as I do that, it just changes the page because of the template that I've built. And here I've put in just little like tags that remind me of where to go to rename it, replace client name with the client's actual name. Over here, as I've evolved this template, which I hadn't done yet with the previous Acme Inc., I've started to build out, templates for typically like what the banking page might look like for this client, where here I put in like sort of a section where you can add banking login. So here's bookmarks, right, to the different banks, just as an example. Over here, I would list each of the different bank accounts, and these are called toggles. I like them because you can expand them for more context, right? And so for each account, bank feeds updated, that's going to happen weekly. And then once a month, I confirm if we have the statement, is it reconciled, right? And so how did I do that? Well, if I go into here, I can create a new template here. I'll edit this one just to show you. Here's the banking template. And you'll see that this is exactly like editing any page in Notion, right? But you'll see up here, it says you're editing a template as a reminder. So obviously you wouldn't want to put anything, too client specific in here. It's got to be the generic information that you would want to use for any client that you'd use this for, right? And again, this is just my thought on how to lay out a page like this. You might have a different idea. And notice I have a status for this called recurring. That's my way of knowing it's recurring because I don't necessarily want to have an actual recurring thing, because I don't want my database populated with all these duplicates essentially of the task. But I know some of you do prefer to do it that way. And so for those of you who do, back over here at this level, when I go into the templates, I can, not what I meant to do. My trackball on my mouse is like sticky today for some reason. So I can go up here. You have to click the ellipsis and go up here where it says repeat. And then I can choose every day, week, month, year, right? So there's no like custom one. But that's there for those of you who want it. And then based on however you set it up, it will create another version of this page with all the templates information in it each time, right? So just to give you a quick idea of what this looks like, I've got stuff blurred out, obviously, but here's my actual one, right? And you can see, like I said, that my own company is treated like another client in the list. But you can see I've got the client list, I've got the different statuses, right? And just to give you a little bit more, so, this shows you a few more of the columns, right? So I have different item types for this, and you can build these into the templates, or and the idea here now, by the way, another reason I like having a situation where each client has its own separate database is the template for each client has all the stuff that I figure I'm going to need for every client. But then after that, once I've used the template and created a page for that client, I can add my own stuff, right? So I can go into, while I'm here in Acme Inc.'s stuff, right? Well, this is the new client template. So let's go back to Acme. And let's go back to their table view. So if I want to add something to the statuses, I can edit this property. And notice I like the status property because it automatically breaks it down between to do, in progress, or complete. And then within any of those sections, I can add in my own, choices, right? Same thing with item type. So I can edit this property and I can so these are all the ones that come with the template. And now if I have something that's specific and unique to just this client, I can add it here without it impacting the other client's item type, listing. So to me, that's one of the, key things I like about this setup is that I can kind of use what's useful to all of them and not use the things that aren't. All right, I know I got to wrap up because we're out of time. I probably should make these an hour and a half. Two major reasons why this is useful: low to no chance of commingling and accidentally sharing clients' information with each other. Also, like I just said, each client may have many of the same things, but they're also going to have some things that are different and unique to them. I showed you all of this, okay? Nothing specific in the template. Like I said, remember what keeps me sober may get you drunk. So you have to come up with your own set of, preset items and things, right? Note the references I showed you a few minutes ago. You want to make sure if you've set up a template with brackets like I did to just update the brackets with the client specific information now that you've, sort of invoked the use of the templates. Up here is an example with one of my actual clients where I've created different views, and for each view, you can create a unique icon. Again, these little subtle visual things make a big difference, right? I didn't get a chance to show you the CRM. Well, anybody who has to leave can obviously catch the replay. Let me show you this because this is pretty slick. So, and you've already seen one component of it because you've seen the, what's it called? You've seen the client. But let's go back up here and there's my bulletproof CRM. So I use myself as the contact as if I'm the CEO of Acme Inc. And now you can see where the CRM and also what's called having a relation where you can have two different databases that are related. So this is one database, the CRM, but then the list of companies, which came over from the work management part, I have a link to that. So basically I create a contact called Seth David, and over here I've linked to the company Acme Inc. So here I have all the links and relevant information for Seth David. And then over here, I can go to Acme Inc. and it takes me right into Acme Inc.'s world. And of course, what this means is I can have multiple contacts in my CRM linked to the same company, which is really useful when you have a CRM and you have multiple contacts. So this is just, the property type is called a relation, and you link it to another database so that you can pick from that database's pages to choose what thing you want to link it to. And the second you do that, you can have it look up any information that's in that database about that, in this case, that particular company, right? So there doesn't have to be redundancy. I create something once and then I can link to it in the appropriate ways. So that's just a very quick drill down on the CRM. I'll skip past all this. So now you've got the foundation for how to set up your firm. Once you have this clear and start to dive in and build yours out, you'll get ideas, like I said, for how to, how you want to set yours up. Okay. Now, what to do next? I promised you at the beginning that I would share with you a way to access the Notion course that I already have for free. And that is part of a promotion I'm doing now for 97 and up, where you can try 97 and up free for 30 days. And, it'll collect your credit card information and whatnot. You can cancel anytime during that 30 days if you don't want to actually go ahead and pay. But if you do stick it out and choose to let it renew, it will renew at $147 instead of the usual $197 a month. And in order to access that, some of you may have already gotten into my website at some point and landed on the page that's got this offer. And if you did, and it's been more than 4 days, that page goes away. You can't access it. So as an offer, just for people who have attended this webinar live, I'm giving you a link here, and I'll put it in the chat so that you can reset that timer. You'll be able to reset that clock. And this link is only good for the next 24 hours. That actually is beyond my control. I was trying to set it up to give you like a few days just to click on the link. Once you click on it, it gives you the 4 days to decide if you want to actually take advantage of the offer. So I'm going to put this in the chat, right? It's just nerdyurl.com/reset97. Okay. And that will take you over to reset the page. If you've never been there, you can use it also. It's fine. But then you'll see where it starts counting you down. For that counter will be 4 days. This is just showing you that you have this link that I created will die basically this time tomorrow. So with that in mind, I'll stick around for any questions. Happy to do that, but give me 1 second to address the person who's at my door. All right, very good. Well, I'll get the replay posted up shortly, and next month I'm actually going to have somebody from Bubble Up help me to present Bubble Up. So that's going to be fun.